I feel like I was put on this planet to be a chef.
85% of the chefs on our platform are women, 80% are people of color, and these are individuals who are historically disenfranchised and have not had access to traditional economic opportunities and dream of being able to build a restaurant one day.
Food is my love language. It is my art.
When we think about global greenhouse gas emissions, people don't often realize that more than a third comes from land use and food systems. Is that mind-boggling?
I don't think there is any time better than right now to try launching your own company or try launching a new product or just try taking a risk.
Was the mac and cheese baked or was it stirred? How'd they make the mac and cheese?
Yeah,
very important question.
It sounds like there's only one right answer for you.
Was it baked
Or was there something else?
You ask me how I feel, I'm feeling great. New crib, new money. You ain't about it, you scared, you funny. We count blessings from the floor to the ceiling. My homie hit me and he asked me how I feel, I'm feeling great.
Welcome to the Cultural Leadership Fund's Zone of Genius series, where we explore the stories of cultural leaders, the impact and evolution of their industries, technology's role in what and how they create, and how to keep innovating with intention. We hope you enjoy it. Thank you all so much for joining us here today in LA to talk about food and sustainability and what we think the future looks like. So much of food is around community and culture and our first memories. I would love to hear kind of each of your first memories around food and kind of what inspired you to be in this space.
The thing that got me into food is like also the same thing that got me into what we call sustainability now, and it was my grandparents. You know, they migrated from West Virginia, South Carolina, to the Bay Area during the Great Migration, right? It was when millions of Black people were moving from the South to the North, but northern cities were heavily segregated. And so as they kind of built their entree into the community, it was always about setting the table. We had the kind of house, my grandparents' house and my house, we didn't lock the door. And no matter what time you were coming over,
that's real old school.
There's something cooking and there's always enough to go around. And at the same time, they didn't waste anything. If you asked my grandmother for a stick of gum, she would cut that, she would rip that, rip a
My mom would do
stick
the
of
same
ring
thing, yeah.
and have it. What would she say? Nobody needs all that gum.
Yes, 100%, yeah, actually.
And so many things like that. We all have our stories. I mean, you know, we talk about sustainability now as if it's like a new concept.
Yeah.
But actually, Indigenous people and many of our ancestors have been rooted in these practices of really honoring the value of things and really honoring the value of people. That's just the way it's always been. So I'm definitely part of the sustainability movement, but at my core, I'm just doing what my grandparents did, honestly.
Yeah,
It's beautiful.
that's awesome. That's awesome. What about you, Alvin?
I mean, I'm so excited to kind of hear everyone's story because I think that's the beautiful thing about food is that, you know, there really is a lot of culture and heritage in every bite. And that was definitely the case with our family as well. You know, my parents came here from Iran in the 70s, and like most immigrants, they had to rebuild everything from scratch.
Right.
And I have so much respect and admiration for just the immigrant story in general and the sacrifice that goes into coming into a new land with, you know, armed with very little, almost nothing in your pockets, very little language skills, but a lot of hope and ambition and a lot of dreams. And I think it's such a testament to the human spirit that just that hope and that ambition and the dream of being able to build a better life for your kids is enough for you to make sure that every time you get knocked down, you always get back up again. And you view every single potential failure as an opportunity and as a lesson. And, you know, this concept of failing upward or failing forward, you know, I think that's probably what I'm most grateful to my parents for is being able to model that for us as kids. And then also there's this other side of it, which if you ask, I think anybody who is the child of immigrants or has some sort of immigrant story in their background, there's also some kind of feeling of obligation and guilt or like an acute sense of how do I repay them for that sacrifice? Because just by virtue of being born here or even being raised here, I know that, you know, I've had so many opportunities that a lot of other people would only dream of having. And that's because of them doing everything they needed to make sure that we were able to have that upbringing. I think a part of this story that's interesting is I actually grew up in a motel. And one of the things that I'm so grateful for growing up in that environment is I had the opportunity to watch my parents work incredibly hard to build a better life for us as kids. And I think it taught us to not take a lot for granted when we're growing up. But one of the most beautiful things of it, and when I think about my childhood, my fondest memories invariably revolve around the dinner table. Always. We would pull up from school into the motel parking lot. We'd open the door, and you're just hit with these amazing smells of fresh bread just crackling, and fresh basmati rice, and this simmering, savory stew that I just always think about, Horesh de Reime, which is my favorite. Oh my God, it's basically yellow split peas, lamb or beef.
Oh my God.
It is just so delicious. And then you have these golden crispy potatoes on top.
Ooh.
And the best way to eat it, if you all are familiar with Persian food, the thing that people always fight over is the golden crispy rice at the bottom, right?
El pegado, they call it. The part that sticks to the pan.
Yes, it's so amazing. We call it tadig, which literally means bottom of the pot.
Yes.
And it's golden and crispy. And if you want to get, like fancy with it, you put some saffron in it. It's so amazing. And then you have this soft stew juxtaposed with this crispy rice, and you just, oh my God, I'm getting so hungry just thinking about it.
And this is what the rest of this section is.
We gotta get out of here. Let's go have some food. Yeah, it's amazing.
Please.
Yeah, and I think, the point of all this is, even when times were tough for my parents, you could always rely on food.
Yes.
And it's only now that I realize that it was never about the food. That was my mom's way of showing us that we were loved, we were protected, we were safe, 100%.
Very much safety.
That no matter what happens, our family unit's together, and this food is what brings us all together and what will allow us to get to the next step.
Yeah.
And that's just, I just kind of get emotional thinking about it, because I know that this isn't a singular story. And so many other people I've spoken with have different versions of this story. And I think that's why food is such a beautiful thing.
I love that so much. And you actually just put something into perspective for me, because I hadn't associated food in that way. But it's very much when I'm at my mom's house and she has made food and I sit down, I'm like, whew, it's all fine.
It's like a hug
Yes.
from the
It's all gonna be
inside.
fine.
Yes.
No, I too, going home and being able to share conversation and sit around that dinner table, I think it's like a rejuvenation. It
Yeah.
gives you like a self-rooting system, because you get to tap into, as you both mentioned, the lineage of your culture, of your family, of the ancestors, which 100% is that lens, this sort of gateway into the past and a bridge into the future, and so to be able to strengthen that bond that holds us together is impeccable. It is really a labor of love. It is a labor of servitude that has to come from a very humble place, and it's an honor to be able to be of service, right? So, then you have people that are chefs and make careers out of it. For me, I feel like I was put on this planet to be a chef, truly. It started too with my grandmother, on my father's side, my mother's side, all of the matriarchs in my family, my aunties, everyone was like always in the kitchen. Every notable celebration of life, all I remember was like the gumbo or the mac and cheese, or even making dumplings with my grandmother.
Was the mac and cheese baked or was it stirred? How'd they make the mack and cheese?
Yeah,
very
very
important
important
question.
You
Very
know.
important
It sounds like
question.
there's only one right answer for you.
Was it baked or?
Or was there something else? So my Aunt Linda, bless her heart, she does a baked mac and cheese. And so, yes. And so, for myself, I come up in sort of this classic French fine dining world.
Nice.
And so I make a really beautiful bechamel. I've modeled my mac and cheese off of hers. And in turn, when you add cheese to a bechamel, it makes a Mornay sauce. And so that's how I do mine, and kind of like,
Which
bake
noodle
it.
type?
Pardon?
Which noodle
I have
type?
an elbow macaroni, large elbow. I don't think, it depends on, what cheeses I'm using. These days I use like a blend of like Comte, which is this beautiful, like 3 to 5 year aged.
We're
that's a whole
going there.
nother-
We're
that's a whole
going
nother
there.
conversation.
Cheese is my favorite.
Same,
Yeah.
yeah.
Oh my
It's a beautiful comfort food. So like for me, being able to have, yes, food is my love language. It is my art, right? It is my, understanding of how the world works. It's being a conduit of Mother Nature. It celebrates so many touch points of who we are as human beings. And I would say, especially in the digital world, we get these opportunities to do real tangible things, right? Think about a dish that was from generations and generations ago, and create that and put that on the table and have it give us life, and then it goes away. It just lives in our data, and that is so freaking special, So when I was a kid, rollerblading around my parents' little front yard, I thought, what do I want to do with the rest of my life? I wanted, for sure, even at 9 years old, it had to be something that I wanted to not feel like I had to go to work. And my dad would always say that, pick something. I think he picked the job just to put food on the table and take care of his family, as any, person would do. But he'd always tell me, pick something where you feel like you don't have to go to work a day in your life. And I thought about that, and I truly took that to heart. And for me, that's food, and it evolves, and there's so many beautiful touch points in the food space.
Yeah.
Julia, I love how you've used those experiences to build your companies now. So you have a ton of experience building food companies and consumer companies. I would love to hear a little bit about how you have seen those things evolve over the years, and how you think brands and companies are reaching consumers now to talk about food.
Yeah. Nyesha, I love this vision of these beautiful matriarchs in your family who are just amazing people in the kitchen. And I wonder, when you said to your family that you wanted to go in food, were people like, yeah, go for it?
No, 100% not.
100% not, right? Such was the case with my family. Actually, my grandpa shed a little tear. I was like, Grandpa, I'm going into food. And he's like, can't you just be a doctor or a lawyer? Or if you have to, at least go to business school.
Right.
So in many ways, the place that I find myself in the food system is a combination of my unique passion and also, to some extent, that guilt, that need, that desire to make my ancestors proud. So I really play in food tech, and I leverage kind of my background, and I've studied biomedical engineering and my passion for business to kind of build in this space. So everything that I'm doing in and around food is always with this idea of what's the technology that needs to exist to reimagine our food systems so that they actually work.
Yes.
So, that might be robots making pizza at Zoom, or that might be regenerative agriculture at scale, which, by the way, agriculture can be a technology.
Absolutely.
Although the market doesn't always value it as such.
Yes.
It is technology. That's moonshot, right? How can we maximize the regenerative potential of our land through food and brands? And then most recently at Planet FWD, how can we leverage big data to help every company understand with laser focus exactly where they are on greenhouse gas emissions, water, land, energy. But it all comes from this deep and unapologetic identity that I am a nerd. That is just who I am. Whatever I'm doing it 100%.
Absolutely.
I'm going Comté 5-year. I'm telling you about Comté's cousin Gruyere, whatever it is, I'm nerding out. And I feel like being a builder in the space of food really allows you to tap into your passion, but also do it in a way that has some ability to commercialize and scale.
Thank you so much for telling us about those companies. And I think it's really important to highlight you, Julia, because the work that you've done is no small feat. First Black woman to raise at a multi-billion-dollar valuation with her company Zoom Pizza. Also, her company Moonshot Snacks was recently acquired by Patagonia, their first acquisition in over 20 years.
Yes,
so very proud of you.
Yes, Chef.
Yes, ma'am, because we need to say the things. We're just going to lay it on the table, Julia.
Wow.
Your amazing work. But I think there's another thread here that's really important. Both of your companies, Zoom and Moonshot Snacks, and Planet FWD overall, are about the role of climate.
Right.
And climate change. Tell us about the relationship between climate and food.
Yeah, I mean, you all know this, right? So when we think about global greenhouse gas emissions, people don't often realize that more than a third comes from land use and food systems. Is that mind-boggling? Yeah. We often think about transportation and energy as the sectors that need support with decarbonization, but we've got to fix food. The beautiful thing about food, though, is not only can we reduce the emissions related to food, but food systems can actually draw down carbon, rebalance carbon cycles. When Native Americans in the United States were in charge of managing the land, our land was a carbon sink. We had topsoil 6 and 8 feet deep all across the country, rich and black and sticky. You know, that beautiful soil that's full of life, where you just pick it up and you can feel it.
Yes.
And so what I love about this food systems transformation work as it relates to climate is not only can we stop the bad, we can also really enhance the good. And if we do, not only do we have a shot at preserving everything that we love about food, but we can also create a just transition, providing really good opportunities for people to engage in this sort of next wave of green food. So yeah, it gets me really fired up.
Do you think that the oceans are able with seaweed to draw down some of that carbon?
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah. So are you a seaweed nerd as well?
Yes, big
I'm
time.
like so excited about seaweed
Right?
because seaweed has this beautiful ability to draw down carbon,
Yes.
to deacidify water
100%.
columns, to act as literal barrier for coastal storms so that
Yes.
as our climate continues to change, because we need not just to reduce greenhouse gas emissions, we also have to adapt.
Absolutely.
Like climate change, I'm sorry, it's already here. And so we need natural systems that can
Yes.
help build our resilience. So what were you going to say about seaweed? Because I'm like,
No, I'm just
yes.
curious. I mean, I think it's just a really powerful tool that we have when we're talking about food systems and how it has this sort of tandem conversation around it also being tech and scientific and all these, food has this beautiful love language and everything behind it, but it also has a lot of powerful usage to it as well.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Seaweed for food, seaweed for packaging, seaweed,
Seaweed for beauty also.
Yes.
Absolutely. I soak seaweed and use it as a toner, and it's just like, so I'll use the seaweed in a salad and use the alkaline water for a toner, and it's just all natural.
Yeah.
But I think that's like the conversation and the facets around being sustainable. It's not just like, this one parallel conversation. There's so many ways to adapt, different natural products into just being sustainable in everyday life, I feel like.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Nyesha, I was wondering about that glow. It's the seaweed. I knew it.
Yep, I think you bring up a really good point that everybody thinks it's like, oh, I just need to switch to an electric car.
Sure.
Right? And that those are the only ways. But I think one of the things that you'll be able to contribute very heavily to this conversation, Julia, is what are the simple ways? What are the easiest things that people can just create a quick habit out of, and the collection of those things add up in the end.
Yeah, I mean, I'd love to hear what Alvin and Nyesha think and how you're sort of living a more sustainable lifestyle. I'll say something kind of controversial. So, I mean, one of the best things you could do on an individual basis to reduce your food-related footprint is to adopt more vegan times in your day.
The V word.
The V word.
Yeah.
But food is so closely related to our culture, our practices. I remember when I announced to my mom that I was vegan, it's like I broke her heart a little bit. It was like so many of the things she loved to give me with love, I was now kind of saying no to. And so now I'm like vegan-ish.
Yeah.
When I go to my mama's house, I eat what my mama cooks.
Yeah.
Totally.
And she's naturally incorporating more and more of this, sort of plant-based, lifestyle into her cooking. But it's not just being vegan. It could be growing your own food.
Yep.
It could be wasting less food, since food waste accounts for about half of food-related climate change. Can you just maybe use those leftover bits and make a sofrito?
I think that is like one of the things I consider my superpowers. Like my brain goes wild with creativity when I think about the opportunities for byproduct use. Like, being able to also an avocado seed. I know that's like a basic example, but like I have a humble home. I have 4 little avocado trees based off of like just using that seed and germinating it, and same with apples. And I always make these little projects. I will stick a green onion root system in the ground and grow a brand new bunch within 2 weeks. And I cook and I walk outside and I snip my herbs and I put them in my meal. That is a way of being sustainable as well. I compost, I have a small little compost situation. And I think those practices are really useful tools for people to use practically, in everyday life.
That's a good reminder too that it doesn't have to be everything all at once, right? I think, sometimes people hear, oh, I have to be a vegan in order to, be sustainable, so I don't want to do it. But to your point, it can be baby steps. I think as human beings, we have such an incredible ability and access to regenerate.
Yep.
And I think also in this moment in time, even being vegan, is so much more palatable in a way than it used to be 20 years ago, because so many individuals are working so hard to be able to recreate a lot of grandma's recipes
Yeah.
without potentially having to use lamb or beef or whatnot. We were just together, my fiance's family and my family were together for my younger brother's graduation. And my fiance's father is vegan. He's been vegan for a few years now. And this was the first time that he cooked for my parents. And it was kind of a moment of like, oh, are they gonna be, what's going on? You know, like there's not gonna be real beef. It's, you know, a meat substitute, things like this. And they loved it.
Sure.
They loved it. And it just made me so happy to watch. And literally, we were together maybe 4 days. Every single night, they were like, can you cook for us again tomorrow? Can you cook for us again tomorrow? And I think those are the moments where you kind of, you become so much more hopeful.
Yes.
Because again, just baby steps, literally having Persian parents who have grown up eating this amazing food that's very lamb-based, beef-based.
Yes.
To fall in love with this food, like that gives me a lot of hope for the future, and also indicates that as long as we're willing to try, be open to
Yes.
trying this kind of path, then I think even if everyone does a little bit, collectively, that's actually really significant.
Yeah,
And I think-
exactly. A little bit adds up to a lot. Like, and I think sustainability in that term, it's just about being conscious. Like, what am I doing after if I do decide to eat lamb or chicken or beef, what am I doing with the bones? What am I doing
Yes.
with the other parts? Can I
Yeah.
throw that in the freezer and make some beautiful bone broth or chicken stock or something that goes into another dish, you know, and everything has value and purpose and nothing goes to the garbage if possible or landfills.
Yeah.
And I think your point, Alvin, speaks a lot to the opportunity of Shef, right? The story you just told about your in-laws cooking for your family is a lot of what Shef is able to do and a lot for people. I'd love for you to talk about that a little bit more.
100%. So, you know, at Shef, we're basically trying to empower individuals to become food entrepreneurs without having to go through all of the risk associated with opening up a restaurant. And, you know, my parents actually, when I was younger, opened a restaurant, and it was kind of the culmination of a lot of hopes and dreams and also a really exciting new business opportunity. What's really heartbreaking about restaurants is that it costs now on average $300,000 just to open a restaurant in the United States. That number is mind-boggling. And it's unfortunate because that means that it's cost prohibitive for most people to even think about or dream about opening a restaurant, let alone follow through with it. And then even if you're lucky enough to get past that initial financial barrier, then you have to figure out how to get people through the doors, you know? How do you do effective marketing? How do you create a menu? How do you price that menu? How do you deal with demand forecasting? How do you deal with food waste? All these things that make it hard for even the most seasoned entrepreneurs to make it in the restaurant industry.
Totally.
And so, in a way, once you kind of realize that, it's no surprise that most restaurants statistically end up failing in their first year of operation.
Yeah.
First year. That means most people won't even have the opportunity to figure it out before they potentially run out of money. And so, because of that, you know, my co-founder Joey and I, we decided if we could build a platform where we could help immigrants, refugees, other folks, disenfranchised individuals, stay-at-home parents who can't afford to pay for daycare, whatever it may be, individuals in the access and the opportunity to be able to actually make money by staying at home with the kids, doing something that they're already frankly doing for their families, but just making a little bit of extra and being able to sell it to their neighbors and make a meaningful income, you know, that could have actually helped our parents a lot when they first came here to this country.
And now with Shef, people can get home-cooked meals from their neighbors.
100%. And I think, you know, earlier we were talking about restaurants versus homemade food, and the thing is, I love restaurants, and I don't think these are mutually exclusive. A lot of people are like, oh, are you trying to replace restaurants and whatnot? Actually, I believe that we're helping incubate the next generation of restaurant owners. We have a lot of people on our platform now who, because of the opportunity, they are coming on to our platform and learning how to be a food entrepreneur for the first time with very little risk up front. They don't have to pay a crazy amount of money. We onboard them, we help them understand the economics, we help them price their menu, we have all these guidelines. We have, you know, at this point, probably millions of data points that help inform a lot of analytics that essentially let them know, okay, well, this menu item's not doing great. This one's doing better.
Right.
Maybe you should adjust, you know, the price. This is where kind of the supply and demand equilibrium kind of comes into play. We help them with a lot of those things. And now, because we've been around for a few years, we have these amazing stories of beyond just being able to make a meaningful income and what that means for their families. We have a few chefs who have left Shef because now they have so much business and they're so confident that they've opened up their own brick and mortar restaurants. Literally, one of them was just profiled in the New York Times. And we were so excited about that. Someone once said, oh, isn't that a bad thing they left Shef? I was like, no, that's the dream. If we are able to be a launch pad for these individuals and their dreams of becoming restaurant owners one day, then that boulevard doesn't have to be full of broken dreams anymore. We can actually help them, realize what they've wanted to do all along. And what does that become? It becomes a gateway to sharing your culture and your heritage with your community. I remember, we started a year before the pandemic. When the pandemic happened, it was incredibly heartbreaking for so many reasons. And so many restaurant workers were laid off overnight.
Yeah.
And we had individuals coming onto Shef saying that because of Shef, we've been able to avoid eviction. We've been able to avoid homelessness for our families. I had someone come and tell us, I haven't had a job in 4 years. I have 2 kids at home. I'm now making over $1,000 a day cooking on Shef. And when I said, what does that mean to you? She said, I've been able to pay off all of my childcare debts and buy new clothes for my kids for the first time in a long time. I mean, when you hear that, you get so emotional that all you want to do is wake up every day and figure out how you can replicate that result over and over again for millions of people.
Yeah,
and so we're just very blessed to be able to do it.
Over the years, we've seen so many things come and go, frozen foods, keto, the V word, veganism, and so many other things. And of course, obviously fad diets and all those sort of things. How do you think those things either enrich or kind of harm our relationship with food or evolve it in a way that we don't think may or may not be productive?
I mean, I'll speak to diets as somebody who spent probably like most of my life on some kind of a diet until I decided no. I think diet culture is incredibly harmful, actually. I think it creates a real tension around food, and food becomes about calories, and calories are scary and bad. But food is about pleasure. Food is about connection. Food is about joy, love, history. And so when you get into this dynamic where food is the enemy and it's just to be counted and measured and restricted, I think it's incredibly damaging. I think it's damaging to all people. And it's not just women that are really sort of struggling with the diet culture. I think all people are. So yeah, I'm very anti-diet. I think I'm also the healthiest I've ever been in my life. Literally the minute I decided that diet food culture was not part of my life, actually everything changed for me. And isn't that funny, right? When you reconnect to the pleasure and the joy, your body just kind of knows what to eat. Yeah.
What's a trend you wish people would do more of? Like, what is something you're like, oh, this is something I think I would love to see people pick up more?
Well, I think that I would love to see people, number one, like getting in the kitchen and making memories around food, and also celebrating your amazing businesses simultaneously. But I think it's building out a pantry. I think people, demystifying cooking is a thing that I think people should lean into more. But I think that comes with feeling empowered, making more stocks, making your own pesto, like easy, simple things in the pantry that like people might go to the store and buy. Easy takeaways for people are like, dressings, pestos, mayos. I think utilizing...
Easy, you say?
In my opinion,
I got to get it together.
I think so. I think also like thinking outside the box and not being afraid to fail is huge. And I think coloring outside of the lines is important. Like, sure, know the parameters, but like if your mayo breaks, great. Like what an opportunity to allow it to win. Like you can, there's so many ways to like, and we have so much information, access to information these days. But I think also using more vegetables and celebrating the vegetable and having it sometimes be celebrated more center of the plate. And, and why I say that, for example, and something I'm very excited about is like using vegetables as like the base, what we would call like an emulsifier. So instead of like, if I was to attempt to make an aioli, for example, generally speaking, in old school mentality, you might take some egg yolks and you slowly pour some oil into it with like maybe some mustard, a kick of cayenne. Like you could literally do the same thing with slow roasting a carrot and emulsifying some Dijon mustard and oil into the same thing and having a vegan carrot mayo, right?
Ooh,
Wow.
sounds delicious.
Right? So I think that I would love to see people think more outside the box and like take the basic, like functionality of the ingredient, but then like reimagine it,
Yeah. And so I think one of the most interesting things is that now for Next Level Chef, you get to
Yes.
give these insights and these kind of little tidbits to the future chefs and the people who are working their way up. I'd love to hear about how you think, they are going to change the culinary game. Are they thinking outside of the box? And what are the ways that you all can work together to kind of meet some of these needs that we've been talking about?
Yeah, thank you for that question. It's a wonderful question. And it's such an opportunity for me to be able to share and build that bridge and be that gateway.
Yes.
Because as my mentors have done to me in sharing that knowledge, like it seriously like fills my cup every day that I get to be with this team. Like there's 5 hopefuls that give themselves everything. They give me, they're a wealth of knowledge, they're a sponge. And, it's high pressure, in those kitchens. When that time goes off, it's like, okay, how much information can I download into these brains and nurture them at the same time? But like, there's a lot at stake, right? They're up for winning $250,000 and a 1-year mentorship between 3 different chefs. Like it's like, go be great.
Yeah.
We got you, So, throughout that sort of gauntlet, they go through different themes of the day that they cook these dishes and we judge them on. But the beautiful part is being able to mentor them along the way. Not being too far out of cooking competitions myself. I've literally done just about every single cooking competition on the planet. I'm seeing it firsthand with these new batch of like hopefuls, and the beautiful thing is that it's not just professional chefs that are there, I think that's the amazing thing about the food dialogue that's happening on our planet now, there's social media chefs, right? There's home cooks, it's not just these sort of gatekeepers saying like only professional chefs can be cooking at these high levels, right? And what I see firsthand is the level of professionalism and camaraderie that is built between these chefs is incredible.
What do you think is responsible for that culture shift? Because historically, kitchens are very competitive and cutthroat.
Are you kidding me?
right?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah. I think the food space in general, we're kind of like we're tired of the toxic culture, right? I think we've lost too many great minds. I think that we have not paid attention to mental health and all of the darker side of the restaurant business, for so long. And I think that this next generation, and in my generation, our generation, we're doing something about it now, and, having gone through that, I've been in both sides, seen it, lived it, and now want to celebrate all the beautiful things why we get into the food space, right? It's about nurturing, it's about love, it's about that support system, and it's really, it's a two-way street. And I hope that they know that, it's as much as I am on paper a mentor to them, they mentor me too.
Yeah.
Very much so. This show and the opportunity that Gordon Ramsay has presented, is the evolution of cooking shows. It takes away that definitive line of you are here, I am here, and I'm going to tell you how I feel about your food.
Yes.
There's lots of facets to celebrate on a plate, right?
Yeah.
It's a more of a nurturing way to do it, which I love.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's wonderful.
And I think it's really important to talk about, even from a top tier cooking show to a home restaurant to the foods and the snacks that we eat. I think there's an important thread that runs through all of them, which is, where do we get the food from?
Yeah.
Right? This concept of like supply chain of our food. I would love to hear maybe a little bit from you, Julia, about how do we untangle the supply chain when it comes to the food that we're eating.
Yeah. Before the pandemic, when I used to talk about supply chains, people's eyes would just glaze over. And they were like, supply what? But during the pandemic, when we all actually experienced what it was like to go to the store and there was no toilet paper, or to not be able to find eggs, or so many of these commodities, and we heard global supply chain shocks, all of a sudden we became acutely aware of the fact that every single thing in our lives travels from somewhere, made by someone. And so when I think of the supply chain, I actually think of it as a web like an incredibly dynamic and interconnected and intelligent web, linking so many different nodes, you know, restaurants and chefs and homes and retailers. So it's incredibly complex. The opportunity that I think we have right now in our supply chains is to promote more transparency. Because I think we all really have the right to understand where our food comes from. Even if we don't have necessarily the resources and the ability to grow everything at home, we've got to rely on these external partners to bring the food into our lives. But don't you deserve to understand how an ingredient was farmed and by whom? And so Planet FWD is really interested in leveraging data to create more transparency across the supply chain so we can celebrate the great work that's happening. And so we can also start to put some pressure in areas where consumers are ready to see some change.
So, Nyesha, thank you so much for sharing so much of your story with us. I'd love to hear about what's coming next. What are you most excited about and interested in for the future?
World domination.
Perfect. Nothing less. Nothing
I will
less.
follow you.
In the most positive
Tell me where to go. It's amazing.
You know, for me, I've always had this sort of like growth mindset. Like
Of course.
I love to like, you know, tag on to like any adventure, you know, especially things I believe in. So, you know, and it's about for me, like sort of diversifying and like, how can I be like a big girl and like, you know, invest and grow other companies and nurture things that I believe in. You know, so, you know, for me, those are the things that I'm looking at within myself and also amazing companies like Shef that I'm really passionate about. You know, the first conversation that we had, I was so inspired and I thought, wow, like I see this person. You know, I see the stories that you shared. I see your family. I see the potential and growth and where we're heading as a food space, you know, outside of restaurants and empowering those entrepreneurial sort of mindsets in the individual. You know, I see that. And, you know, when you spoke about that, I mean, there are like people on my block that do this, you know, and it's like, it's such a familial thing. And so, you know, for me, being a sort of investor in Shef, I'm very excited about. That's one facet. And I'm working on a few other projects that maybe I shouldn't say right at this moment, but I would say for me, it's just about leaning into what my message is in food, you know, and that's been a constant North Star of mine is like, you know, I'm not doing this for the fame. I'm doing this because it makes me happy to share with people, you know, and so I'm slowly sort of building some notoriety around that, but you know, that's never been the lead in that, you know. So I would say the main thing for me is just to, in so many ways, be able to touch as many souls through food as possible. Yeah.
And also, too, I think, you know, thank you for that. But also, we feel so lucky to have you as an investor in our company because, as we were talking about earlier, you, I think, embody what it means to evolve the food industry. And I think everything you've done, your journey is just so fascinating to me because, you know, Nyesha has won all these accolades. I think like best chef, like she's had multiple award-winning restaurants. And so she really understands kind of, you know, the grueling kind of day-to-day of what it means to run a restaurant at the highest levels.
Definitely.
And then, and maybe you can expand on this a little bit, but one day you decided this is just too much. I don't want to do this anymore. And to have the courage to be like, all right, I no longer want to do this, so I'm going to do something else. Versus sunk cost fallacy. I put everything into this. This is my career now, and so I got to always go in and do all of this grueling work. Is so inspiring. And then you look at the show that you're hosting now, and you literally have home chefs on there. You have social media chefs. You have people who aren't the traditional award-winning culinary school trained individuals who we've historically seen on TV, many of whom are also white men, right? Like there's such an evolution here where I'm just so grateful that we even get to, you know, work on something together because what you're doing is, I think, a really big step forward in actually lifting up a lot of the same people that we're trying to lift up. Literally 85% of the chefs on our platform are women, 80% are people of color, and these are individuals who are historically disenfranchised and have not had access to traditional economic opportunities. and dream of being able to build a restaurant one day. But for the longest time, whenever we watch the Food Network or whenever we watch any of these cooking shows, the people on TV are not the people at home.
Yeah.
And so to watch your show and to see this incredible tapestry of all these incredible people from amazing backgrounds, sharing their culture, sharing their heritage, and then having the opportunity to be mentored by people like you is amazing.
Yeah,
Teamwork.
I mean, it's incredible how wide the opportunities are in the food space now. I think in the past, as you mentioned, people come patron your restaurant. That's kind of like the exchange. Now you still get sort of this high, amazing, delicious quality of food that can be in your home, right? And that's like very, very powerful.
What's really interesting, I think, is we're talking about food and we're talking about chefs and we're talking about Shef. Shef is a technology company, right? So we're talking about the food space, but Shef is a technology company. And I think what a lot of people don't realize is how integrated technology is across the food space and the restaurant space. Everything from keeping food fresh to transporting it to delivering it to people's homes. I'd love to hear about the ways in which each of you are engaging with technology across your work in this food industry.
Look, I mean, I think, yes, we are a technology company, but I think we're so much more than that too. But I think certainly we're very grateful to what technology empowers a lot of our chefs to do on the marketplace, which is, to my earlier point, now you have all this data that we can just freely share with our chefs to help them make the decisions they need to identify how to be more successful. And this is data that historically you either don't have, or you have to work really hard or for a very long time until you can even obtain that data to then help inform whether you're going to change the menu, change the price.
Totally.
How do you actually know if someone likes what's on your menu? A lot of it is a guessing game when you're traditionally building a brick and mortar restaurant. Maybe every once in a while you'll ask, what did you think of the food? But more often than not, those people just don't come back, and you don't know why. Attribution becomes very difficult. And so when you have a marketplace with all of these data points from, thousands of transactions across the country, we can then start to zoom out and see these patterns. And these patterns become very helpful for the thousands of chefs who are trying to build a business for the very first time, learning how to do it. And so I think that's where, for us, technology becomes super helpful, because ultimately the end goal is for us to help the chefs. And the reason we wanted to call the platform Shef was not only because we wanted the word she to be in it as a tribute to my mom and Joey's mom and all the incredible parents and caretakers out there who work so hard to support their families every day. But beyond that, we wanted to always make sure that our team and frankly the world knows that it's always about the chef. We started this company trying to figure out how we can always help them as opposed to the other way around. And I think as long as the chef is the North Star for us, then everything kind of comes from there. And I've said this before, but I really believe it. Our goal isn't to build a successful business, it's to help millions of other people build successful businesses. And if you focus on that, then everyone's going to be okay. I think rising tides really do lift all ships. More often than not, many companies are kind of taking this myopic approach where they're like, well, I got to focus on the bottom line. I got to make my investors happy. And if you're really just focusing
You got to make Nyesha happy, okay?
But that's the thing is, the reason I appreciate Nyesha, and we've been very intentional about the investors who come on to our cap table, is because every person who supported us believes the same thing, which is that it's not about us. It's never been about us. It's been about the chefs. It's been about the people who we're trying to empower. And I think that's why we work well together, because we are focused on the right things for the right reasons. And I really do believe, maybe this is idealistic, but I do really believe if you're going to do anything in this world, do it for the right reasons. Do it because you actually want to effectuate some sort of positive change. Don't do it for a short-term exit. Don't do it to make a quick buck. At the end of the day, when you look back, with this whole regret minimization framework, when you look back and you're 80 years old, can you be proud of what you did? Did you make yourself proud? And if that answer is yes, then great. If it's no, and at any point you're like, I don't really feel good about what I'm putting out into the world, maybe focus on something else and decide to do something that you can really be proud of.
Yeah. Amazing. When I decided to start Planet FWD, I was a new mom, which was a big paradigm shift for me as somebody who really was pretty ambivalent on the idea of children. And in the context of being a mom, I knew that this moment would come in the future where my son asked me, Mom, where were you when it was going down? Where were you when we learned about what was happening with climate change, and what did you do? And I wanted to be able to have a good answer to that question, you know? So we're unapologetically focused on climate change at Planet FWD. We really believe we can use the power of the food to fight climate change. So we imagine a world where it's possible to know the carbon footprint of every single thing, right? From a Domino's pizza to a bushel of apples. We really believe that carbon is the new calories, and so we work to make that possible through data. So there's some fantastic applications of technology all throughout our business. You know, we're looking at artificial intelligence and machine learning to automate some of the processes that have been controlled by consultants and therefore very expensive. Applications of machine learning to be able to provide intelligent suggestions and recommendations to companies who want to be able to move the needle. And so we get very excited about living at this intersection of food and technology because there's so much magic that can happen there. And frankly, there's so many amazing opportunities for people to come into the work, right? Maybe you're excited about food and climate change, but you're a programmer or you're a salesperson. Come on in. Like, this is the perfect moment to be thinking about a career in this space because there's just so much opportunity in front of us.
Rapid fire, go to comfort food. Just the one that you're just like, If you describe something else as beautifully as you described that first dish,
Can't.
You're gonna have to
That
cook it.
dish is everything for me. You know, it's funny because that dish too, and this is kind of the concept of our entire company, which is, you know, homemade food is very different than restaurant food. Restaurant
Yes.
food is amazing. I think there's just every kind of type of food evokes a different emotion, a different reaction. And in my mind, you know, the difference, and I think this is probably an overgeneralization. I'd love to hear what you think about this too. But generally at restaurants, depending on the type of restaurant, you're cooking at a mass scale. You're cooking for a lot of people. It's not necessarily slow cooked, small batch orders. You are kind of, you know, hoping for a short term, like, boost of, oh my God, that's so beautiful and amazing. So that means higher oil, higher salt, potentially more fat content. But you might not feel the best the next day after you have the restaurant meal. And so you can't necessarily have restaurant food every day. So what's the difference between that and homemade food? Homemade food, and I think Aron Sanchez says this, which is, you know, the difference is that grandma's never in a rush, right? And so she's taking her time and making this food for you. And for my mom, when she would make that choresh tereme, I've never tasted that flavor at a restaurant. You know, I always go to a Persian restaurant, I'm like, oh, I'll have the tadig with the tereme, and I have it, but it's like, you can see the oil on the top, and afterward, just the high solute, and you're just like, oh man, it was delicious in the moment, but I'm not feeling the best.
Yeah.
And so the first time I ordered tereme on Shef, I got it from a local Persian mom making it, and I was like, okay, well, I gotta reduce my expectations. Nothing's gonna be like my mom's, you know? And I got it, and literally that first bite that I took, boom, I was right back. I felt like I was
Wow.
7 years old in my mom's
Love
kitchen
that.
You have
table.
to put the love in the food.
Yeah, absolutely. And I
100%.
was, I literally had tears in my eyes as I was eating it because I didn't even think, you know, I could have that outside of my mom's
Wow,
kitchen.
it's powerful.
And it was just so beautiful. It took me right back to, you know, feeling like I was safe with my family.
Yeah. I mean, I've got to say the dish that I cook the most are slow cooked dishes, like soups and stews.
Okay.
That's like my thing since I was a kid. I literally would like, this is so like, it's not random because it's always been written in the stars, but I was the kid who would like run home from school and like play restaurant and like cook for my little friends. And I'd always make soup for them.
Wow.
And I think it was because, I don't know, I feel like soup like warms your soul, you know, and you can feed a lot of people with not putting a lot of, you know, expensive high-end ingredients in it. And I think that there's value in that. And so to this day, like I made this lentil soup on Sunday and I packaged it up for friends and I gave like 3 of my friends a little care package, and my friend wrote me today and she was like, I threw some like roasted chicken in it and that was my dinner, and like it was incredible. And like that's just a love language, you know, so it's really cool.
For me, honestly, so there was a time in my life when I lived on a water buffalo farm. in the south of Italy. It was after business school, and I really wanted to learn about this cuisine called la cucina povera, so poor people's food. And the thought was, in this part of Italy, people were not incredibly wealthy, but they lived to be old, and they were healthy, and low incidences of diabetes and obesity, and it was all about just the food system.
Totally.
So when I'm craving that feeling of like utter wellness, I often find myself looking for the flavors and the textures that I experienced when I was living on that little water buffalo farm. So like super fresh cheese. It could be mozzarella di bufala, it could be something else. Fresh basil from your garden, the ripest tomato, very good olive oils. I think the kindest thing you could ever bring me is if you travel somewhere and you get a very good oil. That's like the best gift anyone could show up with in my life. So it really is like kind of reconnecting me to a time when I just felt so well.
Yes.
And I felt so nourished by the food system.
And so my final question for you all is, what challenges are you facing, right? In your space, on your show, in your company, what challenges are you facing? You know, one of our biggest goals for this podcast is to help people who want to start thinking about solutions, right? So if there's something that you're thinking about or want the world to start tinkering over, what might that look like?
Well, in my experience, you know, and it's not a comparison thing of how I came up versus the next generation, but I would say that there's great value in deferred gratification, right? And I think that anything worth having, you should work towards and fail at it a lot, fail at it a lot. And you know, it's not even about failing. They're all growth opportunities. And I think deferred gratification is something that is important. You know, I think in the digital age and social media and this everything now and everything's very quick, right? We have so much access to information. I think it's important to go slow where we can control that element of time, right? The sort of one non-renewable resource that is on our that we have access to. You know, I think to be intentional with time is important.
Yeah. I love
Any other
that, like,
hurdles?
sweetness of slowing down. You know, there's a real sweetness in slowing down, even if the world tells us to hurry up. And as venture-backed founders, sometimes we're thinking about those venture timelines. You got to return that money at 4 to 7x in 4 to 7 years. And it can feel like there's a lot of pressure. But it's actually, for me, the challenge I'm experiencing right now, which is, I think, the challenge that so many of us are experiencing just as humans living on the planet. It really is the mindset. You know, how do you remain maybe impatiently optimistic or even radically optimistic in the face of so much stuff that's going down? You know, I'm like a science fiction nerd. I love reading science fiction novels. And Kim Stanley Robinson, one of my favorite authors, had a quote, which was, "To be able to tread the line between despair and hope is the essential condition of people living right now." And so I think the challenge that I'm experiencing is to understand when I'm dipping into that despair and then being able to have the mechanisms, whether it's enjoying food or going to CrossFit or spending time with friends, that take me back into an optimistic place where all the kind of good energy can flow.
Dopamine.
Yeah, all the dopamine.
Yeah, 100%. I agree with all of those points. I think if I would hope for anything, it's within a business perspective, it's that more people would try and not be afraid to fail.
Yeah.
And I think to Nyesha's point and to your point as well, technology has changed so much, and it continues to change every single year exponentially. And every single year, this will probably be the same and will continue to be true. But I don't think there is any time better than right now to try launching your own company or try launching a new product or just try taking a risk. Because back in the day, you used to need a lot of people to build a website or to launch a product. Now, with drag and drop, and you have all these different tools that you can literally get, you know, a website up in, 5 minutes.
Yep.
And with the advent of AI just blowing up this year as well, people can be 10x more productive than they used to be a couple years ago. You know, my younger brother is launching his own law firm later this year. He just graduated from law school, he's studying for the bar, but he has the courage to do so because now with ChatGPT and all these other AI tools, he can be 10x the lawyer that he potentially could have been a few years ago because it can just help him spit out demand letters, cease and desist. Like you can it's as if he has a whole team behind him,
Yeah.
but he's just a solo practitioner. And I think the same is true for any sort of founder who wants to build, you know, a new company or a new product. Just try. I think the hardest part is just trying. Like, take that first step. It doesn't even have to be a big thing. You don't need, and you can back me up on this, you don't need venture funding to be able to build a company. I think this is a very common misconception. Many of the most successful companies and successful exits have been with founders who have bootstrapped their companies. And it's a beautiful thing because, you know, I think both are beautiful. With some companies, venture capital is important to actually help you exponentially, you know, be able to move fast depending on what you're building. With other companies, you don't need it. And you can potentially exit at a much higher return too. And what it also allows you to do is not have to worry about necessarily all of the time pressure, the external kind of expectations and things like this. And so I think with that in mind, if there are high school students who are like, oh, well, I wonder if I can do this, I wish one day I could be a founder, you can be. If there are people who are already mid-career and they're like, oh, I wish I could do it, but it's too late. It's never too late. It's never too late. I always think of, when we're talking about food, Colonel Sanders, and when he made KFC, I think he was in his 60s or something like this.
Wow.
So it's literally never too late to start something new.
It's kind of like your kitchen. I always say that. It's like when you're at the stove and you're making your life, and you're following the recipe and creating it along the way, you have things that simmer, and then you have things that, like an omelet, that are quick burning, and you get that result right then. But yeah, don't be afraid to have multiple avenues, like that stew that you might eat in 3 days or 3 years or whatever. You know, it's really cool.
Because you can freeze it.
Exactly. Smart.
And eat it
Portion
later.
control, pulling out.
I'm all about that 3-year stew.
Well, thank you all so much for joining us. It's not lost on me that everybody has so many other things that they could be doing, but you've decided to carve out just a little corner for us. So thank you so much.
Thank you so much for having us. Seriously.
Of course,
Wonderful.
of course.
And when you ask me how I feel, I'm feeling great. New crib, new money.